Honestly, I'm not even sure that Marat is a good person. Patya deserves so much better than him. This book I found on a couple of those best contemporary Russian novels lists and on the English side of the internet. Because there are wonderful Russian books out there, but not all of them are translated into English, and I really want to talk to you about books that you can also read. And this book, Bride and Groom by Alisa Ganieva, is available in English, as well as some others by the same author. This also fits nicely into my attempt at featuring more female authors instead of just focusing on the bearded 19th century men. The book did garner some attention and critical buzz here, but it looks like it got the same amount, if not more, in the English-speaking side of the world. For instance, Wikipedia has a page on the book in English, but not in Russian. And if that's not a claim, I don't know what is. The book tells the story of two young people, Marat and Patya, who come home from Moscow to a small village in Dagestan and try and find a spouse there. While this search goes on, we also see religious tensions in the village, as well as problems with the law and corruption, and a clash of traditions. This is the best approximation of a wedding dress that I have. Now, I don't like to show my hand so early on, but I didn't like the book that much. Most of it does have to do with the ending, and we will get there, but even without it, there is still something missing. I think one of the problems is that the book throws a lot at you all at the same time. Characters, locations, traditions, customs, jargon, all of it. It's all too much. The charitable reading is that it's supposed to signify this mess and cacophony that surrounds these characters, but I didn't read it as such, no. It feels like the book could have used a little bit more streamlining, because it's rather difficult to parse through all of the information provided to you as to what is going to be important later on and what is simply like mood setting. For instance, the very first scene of the book, while thematically relevant, it is also incredibly random and kind of weird and awkward, so it almost begs for a rewrite. The books that I review, I need to read them at least 2 times to get all of my thoughts in a row. And it needs to be said that yes, on the second read, it's a little bit easier to see the hooks that Ganieva puts early on for them to pay off later, but they're still completely overwhelmed and swallowed by all of the other events and characteristics and customs and ideas that are simply there for mood or to set up themes. And it's a shame too, really, because thematically there is a lot going on here that is quite interesting. Obviously, the central theme is the theme of marriage and dating in these small Muslim communities and how these traditions evolve or don't evolve when the kids go off into the big city. This theme of marriage obviously does not exist in a vacuum. It bleeds into gender dynamics, religion, money, corruption, etc. Some of these aspects are presented in, say, mothers of the bride and groom, and what they look in a potential candidate for their children, what is important for them, and what can be overlooked. Some of the other themes are presented in the side characters, the friends and family, and the community as a whole. But all of these themes are under the umbrella of traditions and the clash of said traditions and the modern world. We see it a little bit more in Patya rather than Marat. We actually don't get to know a lot about Marat's personal life in Moscow. Here in the book, he simply goes along with his mother's wishes to get him married, until he meets Patya, that is. I'm not even sure that Marat is a good person, to be perfectly honest with you. There is a plot beat in there that he's working as a lawyer and he's working a case of the murder of a human rights activist. That's social commentary, by the way. There were quite a few big cases in the real world of activists being killed in Chechnya and Dagestan. But for the longest time, I couldn't even figure out if he's represented the killer. Patya could do so much better than him, even at her old age of 26. With Patya, there is almost a rom-com part where she meets different men who are absolutely no good for her. A financial bro incel, a 60-year-old man, a pseudo-intellectual and all. And it's a fun commentary on dating scene kind of universally, even before we add the cultural element. There is a bit in there that made me laugh out loud where Patya cannot get away from a very religious dude who is talking at a group of people, and he says that all of the facts, they come from the devil, and Patya hopes that since she's just spewed some facts, that he would also think that she's the devil's spawn and she can get away from him. It's funny. Patya, and Marat, is a little bit more liberated than her peers. Her inner monologue constantly notices these discrepancies in the way that she thinks and acts, and the way that her family and community expect her to be. There is this interesting dissonance for the younger generation who are exposed to a more secular lifestyle by simple virtue of them living in Moscow, and how these traditions, they simply fall away when you leave this small community of your village. That's actually true. I've known and been friendly with a girl from Dagestan, and it's actually quite fun to see them let loose, at least by the traditions of the Muslim community. But when it comes to like big events in their lives, they're still very much traditionally driven. That said, that like something like a marriage would be treated with the gravitas that it deserves, and they would only do it either in their community in Dagestan, or at least they would follow as many traditions as they possibly can if they were to do it in Moscow. They do these little rebellions here, but the caveat is also always, 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 my family can never find out. That's something that we see in Marat and Patya. When Patya spends time talking to a guy from home on some app, she thinks nothing of it, while he considers it courtship and pursues her rather aggressively when they get to meet. Or when Marat and Patya go on a date, it gets blown completely out of proportion and is treated as something completely inappropriate by the village, so much so that they need to get married. Even they, who grew up with these traditions and know them, they simply forget about them or follow them out of obligation rather than true belief. The gender dynamics are about what you would expect. A lot of emphasis on traditional gender roles, the purity of women before marriage, and condemnation of those who do not act in accordance to that, while the men are not held to the same kind of standards, the regular stuff. There are elements that are mixed in with religion, like, for example, the different coverings that women are expected to wear, but I do not know enough about that, and I am not in the mood to do research on that. But there is that element in there as well. The religious theme is probably the second most important one in the book. Dagestan is a region that is one of the more conservative ones here in Russia, and it's also entirely Muslim. However, it's also not without its issues. There is obviously this constant threat that comes from the West, or even Central Russia, as far as traditions and customs goes, but even within the same communities, within the same religion, there is tension. Ganieva paints a picture of a conflict between different schools of thought in Islam, how different mullahs and mosques preach and recruit quite differently, and how that can lead to actual fistfights, and how the failure to comply with the religious doctrine can actually lead to death. For me, such a theme, such a plot is really meaty and worthy of exploration, but in the book, it's constantly fighting for center stage with the supposed central plot of the marriage market, so it's constantly getting sidelined. That's the balancing act that the book fails at, in my opinion. This theme is not integrated well with Marat and Patya's story and simply brushes against it. Kind of the same issue with the corruption/organized crime plotline. And once again, there's interesting stuff there about public perception and revisionist history. There's a character in there, a criminal called Khilibek, who's essentially a mob boss who used to control the village and the neighborhood, and he's expected to get out of jail anytime soon, so the village is trying to get back into his favor and almost putting him on a pedestal to like an angel-like status, or whatever the equivalency in Islam is. And it's interesting to see the mental gymnastics that the people go through to explain away his crimes, the same people who do not believe in evolution and dinosaurs, by the way. It is sprinkled throughout the book, so it's done quite nicely, but once again, it's brushing against the central plot without affecting it much. On the other hand, the cases of corruption are presented rather bluntly, so they don't hit quite as hard. There is a police colonel character who is corrupt from the very first mentions of him, so the end reveal for him is not exciting. Speaking of the ending, it's a little bit of a twist ending, so I'm not going to spoil it for you here, but it reads really cheap. like fanfic level of melodrama, but at least fanfics play it for like low cost, high stakes tension. Here it's played straight with a surprising amount of gravity. And the topic does deserve gravity. It's simply that there is something missing in the execution, so that I don't like it. Maybe it's because I didn't buy into Marat and Patya as a couple. Maybe because it looks like it was added for the shock factor. Maybe it's the actual execution of it. I don't know. The book ends with a beautiful imagery of him watching her standing in the shallow waters of the Caspian Sea, but that's about the only good thing about the ending. Also, take a look at the first edition of the book. This is a cover done right. If you read the book and you know what I'm talking about, I need to mention here that the situation depicted is not outlandish at all. It happens more than it should. It's just that it simply didn't fit here, at least in my opinion. Overall, in my opinion, it's a book with interesting, relevant, and important themes that simply could have been executed a little bit better. So you can read it, but I didn't like it that much.